Welcome to the tutorial for our Hoop Club box by Tessa Perlo. We're calling this the Sun Eye Flower Embroidery because I couldn't think of a better name, but this design is by Tessa Perlo and she is an embroidery artist that I have just admired for so long. If you ever search embroidery on Pinterest, you will just get Tessa's work come up. It's so bold, it's so artistic, and she uses a lot of clothing to embroider onto, so she upcycles clothing and makes these incredible pieces. And so we are lucky enough to have had her design this box, and this is the kit, and this is what we're going to be stitching. So I'm going to take you through it step by step, right from the beginning of getting your fabric in your hoop, and I will walk you through what's in your box, and we'll go through each of the stitches. You've got your written instructions as well, but this tutorial will just give you that extra guidance, and I will be able to show you how I'm doing it. So here we go. So inside your box you are going to have your instructions magazine, and there is an interview with Tessa in here as well. We've got printed fabric. This is transfer paper, stick and stitch transfer paper. So we are going to cut out, I'm going to show you how to do this, cut out each design, and then you're able to stick it onto some clothing or a bag or whatever you want to stitch onto and embroider onto that, and then this disappears with warm water. Got your hoop back for the end, and then we have got 15 skeins of embroidery thread, all the colours here. Then we've got your hoop, your needle and your wadding, and then this little extra. Now there's a story behind this. This is a really useful tool in your sewing box when you're an embroiderer, because normally embroidery hoops have a little screw fixing here, and it means you can tighten the hoop without hurting your hands. But this box's hoops haven't got a screw, and I only realised this as we were packing the boxes. So most embroidery hoops have got this little screw mechanism here, so this is really useful. This is really useful anyway for your embroidery box. I'm sure you're going to do other hoops where you're going to use this, but it's a slightly random gift for this box because there is no screw fixing. I'm really sorry, but keep this in your sewing box. You're going to do other hoops, and that is going to come in really helpful. For this type of fastening, I always use a pair of flat nose pliers, and we sell those in the shop because sometimes you just want to get it really tight, and it kind of hurts your hands to get it so tight. So that is what's in your box, and we are going to start stitching. So to start with, we're going to get our fabric in our hoop. So unscrew your embroidery hoop. You put the smaller hoop on your table, your surface, and then we're going to trap the fabric in between, getting the design nice and central, and then we're going to gradually pull and tighten. So it's a process of tugging and tightening. You don't want to warp the design and pull it so tight that the design is disfigured. What's the word? Warped. But you do want it to get it really nice and tight so that it's fun and easier to embroider. And you shouldn't need to iron it before you do that, but if you have got a bit of a crease in where your fabric's been folded, then just give your hoop a bit of an iron, but we should be able to get that crease out by tugging. So I have that as tight as I can get it, and it feels nice and drum-like when I tap it, so I know that's tight enough. I'm going to use an embroidery stand for demonstrating a lot of these stitches to you so that I can just demonstrate them a bit more freely, but you do not need to use one, but it is a handy thing to have as an embroiderer, and we do sell them. We're going to start with an easy stitch. We're going to start with the heart here. So most of this kit is made up of satin stitch and straight stitch with a little bit of back stitch, so we're going to get really good at satin stitch by the end of this. So we're going to start using 3 strands of the colour 3685, which is this burgundy colour. And in embroidery we often split the strands of thread. So I'm cutting a length about 40 centimeters long here, not too long so it doesn't get tangled, and you'll see that each strand is made up of 6 strands, so we want to stitch with 3. So I'm going to pull that apart just gently, and I'll be able to use 3 of those strands and then come back again and use the remaining 3. So I'm going to thread my needle and I'm going to lick the end. There's no nice way of saying that. I'm going to leave a tail of about 10 centimeters, 8 centimeters, and I'm going to tie a knot in one end. And then I'm ready to stitch. So we're going to start stitching the heart, and we start stitching the outline with a back stitch. This is the simplest stitch. You come up with your thread and then back down about 2 to 3 millimeters away to create your first stitch, and then you come up again about the length of another stitch away, so about 2 to 3 millimeters away, back down through the hole that the first stitch made, so you're connecting up your stitches so there's no gap between them, and then you just carry on like that all the way around the heart. That's back stitch. So that's a nice easy one to start off with, and then pretend that I'm going to stitch that whole thing, but to speed this up I'm then going to show you how to do the teardrops. So the teardrops are stitched in a satin stitch. You would finish this back stitch, tie off your thread at the back and trim your ends, and then start the teardrops, but for speed I'm just going to show you. We're doing our tears in satin stitch, and so horizontally across the tear I'm going to start stitching lines, and I'm not going to make them immediately next to each other to start with. I'm just going to stitch a few up and down the tear, so getting smaller, getting tiny towards the top, and bigger as you go back down. And then this is the way I like to do satin stitches, then go back and fill in your gaps, and eventually you will fill this whole shape with stitches, and you just keep going back over it until you're happy that it looks flush enough and that you've covered all of the fabric. So I've finished my one stitch and I'm just happy that it's covered all the fabric and it looks nice and satiny and plump and smooth. So that's the heart. Just keep doing the same thing all the way around the edge, and then fill in all of your teardrops with satin stitch. That's 3 strands of the burgundy thread. I mentioned you want to keep your threads kind of neat at the back, so when you've finished an area, don't be tempted to skip across if you've got an area that you're stitching using the same colour thread with. Do tie off a knot and trim it off at the back so you keep things nice and neat at the back, otherwise you will end up pulling through stray threads and getting in a bit of a tangle. So I have tied a knot as close as I can to the fabric, and I do that by tying the knot and then pulling it tight with my finger on the thread, and then trim it off. I will show you that in a future element. We're now going to do the sun. This is stitched with a mixture of satin stitch and then straight stitch. There's a little bit of back stitch as well on the nose and the eyes. This is satin, his little mouth is satin. So we do satin stitch on the rays of the sun all the way in, and then we change to straight stitch to fill in the face of the sun. So I'm going to show you how I start that. I love this little character. We're using the mustard. I'm going to take 40 centimeters again, and we're using 3 strands again. I've threaded my needle up in the same way that I did for the heart, and we're doing the rays of the sun in a very similar way that we did to the teardrops. So they're wiggly, so follow the printed line and get your horizontal stitches in. Don't worry about getting them right next to each other to start with, just put in a few lines and then you can go back and fill in. So I'm just going to go all the way down one way of the sun and then go back and fill in the gaps. I'm going to finish my satin stitch at the top of the ray because this little border here will get filled in with straight stitch as we edge the face of the sun. So I'm going to start going back now and filling in the gaps on my ray. Now I've filled in my ray, and I would carry on and do all of your rays, but I'm going to show you how we're going to do the face of the sun. So we're going to start edging the sun with straight stitch or back stitch. For this outer bit of the sun, it's probably easier to use a back stitch. The difference being straight stitch is just an up and down, so you don't connect the stitches particularly. It's like a very simple up and down stitch. So this is straight stitch, but as we want a complete line around the sun, you can do a back stitch, and that will connect all your stitches up. And then we're going to try and blend the thread into the sun, towards the face of the sun, to go from this gold to the cream. So we're going to use one other colour, which is the hay coloured gold thread, to blend into this mustard and then blend into the ecru cream thread. But it's going to be quite random stitches. They don't need to be neat. I think the beauty of it is when it looks very random and kind of threads are all feeding into one another and quite scattered. So I've edged around the face of the sun, and now I'm going to make little stitches towards the middle, and these are going to be alternated with the other gold thread that we've got, this colour, to try and start blending this mustard in. Now in this technique, when you try and blend in threads to one another, is called thread painting, and you would, if you were doing very traditional detailed fine thread painting, you would probably use one strand of thread to give you the most effective colour blending technique, because you can do really very delicate colour blending with one strand. It's less chunky, you don't see the join as much between the different colours. Because Tessa stitches in quite a a chunky style, we're going to stick with the 3 strands. But if you wanted to have an experiment with some more intricate fine thread painting, you could go down to 1 strand and do the same technique, but you're going to have to do more stitches, but your blending is going to be much more subtle than the effect we'll achieve here. I quite like the chunky effect. So I'm going to go around with those stitches, and then I'm going to change my colour thread, and I'm going to just intersperse the paler gold stitches. But before I do that, I am going to show you quickly how we do the lips and the outlining of the eyes, because I don't want to stitch too much into these before I have put those in. So hold the thought on the thread painting and the straight stitch around the third. We're going to look at the lips and eyes now. So for the lips we have a satin stitch, so in the same way that we've just done the tears and the rays of sun, we're going to go up and down and fill in the gaps, and then we'll just fill in our straight stitches around this. So with satin stitch you can get a much better look and feel the shorter the stitch is. So if you are wondering whether to go vertically over a shape or horizontally, just choose the shorter distance to cover with your stitch. So with this one, I could have gone that way, but you just get a much smoother, more satin shape with a shorter stitch. So I've gone across it horizontally, and then I'll just keep coming back and filling those in. My lips, and now I'm going to outline the nose and the eyes with back stitch. Now on my original one I've connected the nose and the eyebrow, and that's not on your printed design, so you can choose to leave it just with the 1 line for the nose, or you can bring up your stitches and connect the nose to the eyebrow, which I think looks quite nice. But these are just little back stitches. Just 1 line of back stitch will be enough to give you that definition. And then we're going to go around the eye in this mustard as well. Now I've got blue, pale blue on my needle, and I've backstitched the eye, and I'm going to now do some satin stitch for the middle of the eye, the pupil, that bit, is that what it's called? So I'm going to take a couple of lines of blue And then I'm going to use one strand of black to go over the middle to create that's the pupil, isn't it? The black bit. So that it actually looks like an eye. So over the middle of the eye, just going to do one tiny delicate strand of black to make it look like an eye. So do exactly the same here, fill in your eyebrow and your eye, and we're going to get back to stitching the face of the sun. So I said I was going to show you how to tie your threads at the back, so I'm finished with the pink, so I'm going to tie a knot. I'm going to pull it tight, and I'm going to keep my finger on that fabric where the thread is being pulled into a knot so that it does knot nice and close to the fabric, and then I'm going to trim it off, and that keeps everything nice and neat at the back. So now I've switched my thread to this gold, this paler gold colour, and in between where I've stitched a mustard stitch, I'm going to start stitching gold. It doesn't really matter where you go, you're just going to gradually build up the two colours side by side. They can be short, long, in fact it probably helps to do them some short and some long and alternate that, and that's going to help it look kind of more natural and more less uniform. So we're going to keep going all the way around, building up the edge of the sun, which is this mixture of mustard and pale gold. So I've just done this section here to show you, and what I've started doing is longer stitches with my pale gold, because they're the ones that I want to blend into the ecru. So they're starting to be the longer stitches that I do on here now, but you can see I've just built up a real mix of the mustard and the pale gold. I just can't stress enough how random this can be, and how just, you know, lots of different lengths, and it's just going to look really nice as you build the stitches up. And just take your time and enjoy building those stitches up. What I'm going to do now is start to blend in the ecru to the stitches that I've done. So I'm kind of doing straight stitches that go into the mustard and gold, blending it all in, filling in any gaps where you can see them. And a little tip is, when you are working with more than one colour on a little section like this, and you might want to go back and fill in a little gap or even it out with a certain colour, you can leave your threads at the top, so don't pull them back through. And in that way you've got them handy, they're all threaded up, but you're not going to get tangled up at the back of your work. So bring them out and leave them on the top if that works better for you. So I'm just going to go along this section that I've done and fill in some ecru so that we can start to blend that in. And you'll see that the stitches eventually become horizontal rather than being directed from the outside in. So on the finished one you can see they start being horizontal and then they go around the shape. So just start to move your stitches where they need to go to kind of flow around the face of the sun. And then I'm just going to carry this on. Straight stitches just blend into one another, and then they become all one colour. And I'm just going to fill in my shape with the ecru straight stitches. And that is in a similar way to how you build up satin stitch, I'm doing a similar thing with my straight stitches. I'm just scattering them around and then I'll go back and I'll fill them in so that I get a lovely random blend of stitches. So I'll carry on doing that and then I'll come back when I've got a bit more to show you, but I'm just going to go around the eye here and then just keep doing random stitches. And as I'm doing this, I'm almost like doing a bricklaying design. I don't want to have loads of stitches all on top of each other in a row, so I'm starting a stitch halfway under an existing stitch, kind of like you're laying bricks, and that will give you that lovely random feeling. I've gone quite far back into the golden mustard edge to just scatter some ecru in, because that's going to make it look blended, and you almost won't be able to see from a distance anyway the change from the gold to the ecru because of those two different shades of gold that are there. And then I've just started to change the direction of my stitches. I'm going to go up here and around the eye, so just gradually change the direction of your stitches, and you can just keep adding them in. You can layer them up. If you're not happy with the direction of some stitches, just add some more in and just layer it up and layer it up. You could really spend quite a long time on these straight stitch elements and the satin stitch, just adding more and more stitches. I don't think you can make it look worse. I think it just gets better and better the longer you spend on it. And feel free to just go back any point and add in bits of colour that you feel are missing or need more defining. But that hopefully gives you the basic idea of how we get this sun stitched. And the blending is just, I love it. It's really fun to see something start to emerge that just looks like you've blended these colours. It's really satisfying. So this is nowhere near finished. I need to spend lots more time adding loads more stitches here and blending all those colours in. So have fun with that bit, but that is the sun. I'm now going to focus on the eye, and I have 3 strands of this chestnut brown, and we're going to start by back stitching the eyebrow, just like we did around the heart. And then we'll back stitch all around the eye as well. So I'm halfway through backstitching that eye, and I'm at the tear duct, and I'm just going to use some satin stitch to fill that tear duct in. So starting at this point, I'm going to fan my stitches out so that I can cover that whole tear duct bit. And then I'll carry on doing back stitch along this bit. Now we're going to start filling in the black around the eye. So most of this is stitched with black and it's a satin stitch, but we're going to come out from the middle of the eye and fill in the shape that way. Then it will look more like an eye. And once we've got a base of black, we will start to add some green, some of the brown, some mustard to give it, I mean, you can make your eye whatever colour you want, really. You could do a blue eye, more of a brown eye. We're just filling in our satin stitch this way. We do leave a gap of white here and we'll fill that in with white satin stitch later, but that will make it again just look more like an eye. So now I've got a base of black. I've filled that all in with my satin stitch. I've switched to a green and I've got one strand on my needle, and I'm going to just start to make these little bits of colour around the eye, but I'm not going to go right into the centre because I want to leave a black circle for the pupil. So I'm just going to leave that centre, very centre bit black. Now this is going to take a bit of time to build up because we're using one strand, but I'm going to just start stitching bits of colour. I haven't done the white section yet, which is the kind of reflection on the eye that makes it look like an eye, but you can see where this green is starting to show. And then as you build that up with lots of different colours, so a bit of brown, a bit of green, it really does start to look like an eye, especially when you then put the white in. So I'll do a bit more so that you can see, but we're just going over the thread that we've already stitched and leaving that central bit to represent the pupil. So now I've added in some single strands of mustard and blue. It's starting to look more like an eye, but when I add in this next bit, which is a block of satin stitch, I've got 3 strands of white on my needle. I'm just going to do a big chunky block here that will look like the reflection of the eye. I've got the white on my needle, I'm going to start doing the straight stitch in the white of the eye, and this is really similar to how we did the sun straight stitch. You want to build up your stitches in a random pattern, so a bit like you're laying bricks. So those two there, I'm going to do one right in the middle so that I haven't just got columns of stitches, because then they won't look very random. And I'm just going to eventually fill up this whole bit with straight stitch. So just keep going and fill it in as much as you can. So that is part one of the tutorial. I will be back to show you how to stitch the other elements of the design, but that is the sun, the heart and the eye. So that will get you going, and I'll see you for part two.